"There is still one person you have not asked." The words cut through the silence of the royal infirmary like a crack of thunder. Every head turned at once. The room smelled of herbs, candle wax, and fading hope. Beneath layers of soft blankets, 8-year-old Noah Blackthorne lay motionless in a large bed carved from white oak. The heir to the Nightfall Kingdom looked impossibly small against the towering stone walls surrounding him. For 7 days, the finest healers in the realm had traveled from distant territories to save him. For 7 days, they had examined him, treated him, and promised they would find answers. Yet one by one, they left the room with the same defeated expression. Now the final healer slowly removed his glasses and lowered his gaze toward the floor. No one needed him to speak. The silence said enough. At the far side of the room stood Alpha King Ethan Blackthorne. He had not slept properly in days. Dark circles rested beneath his silver eyes. His royal coat hung loosely across his shoulders, as though even the weight of fabric had become exhausting. Ethan stared at his son without moving. He was a king. He had faced political crises, natural disasters, and threats against the kingdom. Yet nothing had prepared him for standing helplessly beside the only child he had ever loved. Around him, advisors whispered quietly. Members of the royal council exchanged worried looks. Some had already begun discussing succession plans in private corners of the palace. Others believed the kingdom was approaching a future no one wanted to imagine. Then the voice came again. Calm, clear, unshaken. You called every healer except the one who might actually help him. The crowd parted instinctively. Standing near the entrance was Clara Whitmore. Her simple gray cloak contrasted sharply against the luxury surrounding her. Golden hair framed a face many people in the palace recognized immediately. Some frowned. Others looked openly annoyed. A few appeared shocked she had entered at all. Clara ignored every stare. Her attention remained fixed on Noah. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. He had not seen her in nearly a year. Not since the day she quietly left the palace after becoming the target of endless rumors and accusations. Most people had forgotten her. Many preferred it that way. This is not the time, one council member said coldly. A child is suffering, Clara replied. That makes it exactly the time. The room fell silent again. Ethan studied her carefully. She looked almost unchanged. Still composed. Still calm. Still carrying the strange sense of quiet certainty that had always unsettled people who underestimated her. Why are you here? Ethan finally asked. Clara looked toward Noah. Because he asked for me. Several advisors immediately protested. That is impossible. He has not spoken in days. This is absurd. Clara did not argue. Instead, she slowly approached the bed. Every step seemed to increase the tension inside the room. When she reached Noah's side, something unexpected happened. The boy's fingers moved slightly against the blanket. Barely noticeable, yet everyone saw it. A soft murmur spread through the room. Then, for the first time in days, Noah slowly lifted his hand a few inches. Not toward his father. Not toward the healers. Toward Clara. Ethan felt his breath catch. Clara looked down at the small hand reaching toward her. Her expression softened instantly. For a brief moment, the noise, fear, and uncertainty inside the room seemed to disappear. There was only a frightened child and the woman everyone else had stopped believing in. And somewhere deep inside the palace, destiny quietly began to change direction. The sight of Noah's small hand reaching toward Clara sent a ripple of confusion through the infirmary. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Even the council members who had been arguing moments earlier stood frozen in disbelief. Ethan remained beside the bed, unable to take his eyes off his son. 7 days. For 7 days Noah had barely responded to anyone. Yet now, at the mere presence of Clara Whitmore, something had changed. Clara carefully sat beside the bed. Her movements were calm and unhurried, as though she refused to let the fear in the room control her. Noah's fingers trembled slightly before settling against the blanket once more. The moment passed, but its impact remained. Ethan studied Clara closely. Questions filled his mind, yet none seemed important enough to ask first. Across the room, several advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They all remembered Clara. In fact, forgetting her had been impossible. A year earlier, her name had been spoken throughout the palace almost daily. Not with admiration, with suspicion. Clara had arrived at Nightfall Palace 4 years before as a young Omega chosen to assist with charitable projects across the kingdom. Unlike many nobles, she preferred spending time in villages rather than grand halls. She helped rebuild homes after storms, organized food deliveries during difficult winters, opened schools in territories that had been ignored for decades. Ordinary people loved her. The palace did not. Her kindness made some nobles uncomfortable. Her popularity made others jealous. Rumors began slowly. Then they spread. Some accused her of seeking influence. Others claimed she manipulated public opinion to gain favor with the Alpha King. None of it was true. Yet truth mattered very little once enough powerful people repeated the same story. Clara never defended herself. She never fought back publicly. She simply continued helping others. Ethan remembered those months clearly now. He remembered hearing complaints from council members, hearing accusations during meetings, hearing endless warnings that Clara's growing reputation could become a political problem. At the time, he had been overwhelmed by responsibilities, trade disputes, border negotiations, the challenges of raising Noah alone after losing his mate years earlier. He convinced himself that staying neutral was the wisest choice. Looking back, neutrality felt disturbingly similar to abandonment. Eventually, Clara left the palace quietly. No dramatic confrontation. No public farewell. One morning, she was simply gone. Most people moved on quickly. The kingdom continued functioning. New concerns replaced old gossip. Yet something strange happened after her departure. Villages frequently sent letters asking about her. Children asked when she would return. Community leaders continued speaking about projects she had started. Her absence lingered in places where her presence had once mattered. Ethan noticed it, even if he rarely admitted it. Why did Noah ask for her? One advisor finally whispered. No one answered. Clara looked down at the young heir. The concern in her eyes appeared genuine and immediate. Not the concern of someone seeking attention. The concern of someone who cared deeply about a child in pain. Slowly, Noah opened his eyes halfway. The effort seemed to exhaust him. Yet despite the weakness visible on his face, his gaze searched the room until it found Clara. A faint smile appeared. Tiny, fragile, but real. Clara smiled back. Across the room, Ethan felt something shift inside him. For the first time in days, hope entered the infirmary. Small and uncertain, yet impossible to ignore. And somewhere beneath the weight of old mistakes, a forgotten memory began trying to surface. The faint smile on Noah's face lasted only a few seconds, but it changed the atmosphere of the infirmary more than any medicine had during the previous week. For the first time, the fear gripping the room loosened its hold. Clara remained seated beside the bed, her attention focused entirely on the young heir. She gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and spoke softly enough that only Noah could hear. No one caught the words, yet something in her voice seemed to calm him immediately. Ethan watched every movement carefully. The more he observed, the stronger the strange memory became. He had seen this before. Not the illness, not the circumstances, the feeling. The way Clara could walk into a room filled with anxiety and somehow make people breathe easier. Years ago, shortly after she arrived at the palace, a severe winter storm had trapped several families in a mountain village nearly 60 miles north of the capital. Supplies had been delayed. Temperatures had dropped below freezing. The situation became dangerous quickly. While officials argued over logistics, Clara simply organized volunteers and traveled there herself. When Ethan visited the village a week later, he expected chaos. Instead, he found children laughing around warm fires and families working together to rebuild damaged homes. Clara had spent every day helping without seeking recognition. At the time, Ethan had admired her dedication. Then life moved forward, and the memory faded. Now, standing beside Noah's bed, that memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. What exactly are you planning to do? One healer finally asked. Clara looked up calmly. First, I want everyone to stop treating him like a problem that needs solving. Several people frowned. The healer crossed his arms. He is seriously ill. I know, Clara replied. But he is also a child. Silence followed. No one seemed prepared to argue with that. Clara turned back toward Noah. His eyes had drifted closed again, though his breathing appeared slightly steadier than before. Ethan noticed it immediately. The healers noticed it too. None of them commented. They were afraid to trust what they were seeing. As the afternoon stretched into evening, most advisors reluctantly left the infirmary. Meetings needed attention. Kingdom affairs could not remain paused forever. Yet Ethan stayed. So did Clara. Hours passed quietly. At one point, Noah stirred and weakly reached toward the edge of the blanket. Clara took his hand without hesitation. The reaction was immediate. The tension visible in his small face eased. Ethan stared at the scene, unable to explain why it affected him so deeply. "Why does he trust you so much?" he finally asked. Clara hesitated. For the first time since entering the room, genuine sadness crossed her face. "Because I listened." Ethan frowned slightly. Clara looked toward the window where the last traces of sunlight were fading beyond the mountains. "Most people spoke to him as the future heir," she said quietly. "I spoke to him as Noah." The answer struck harder than she intended. Ethan lowered his eyes. A painful realization settled over him. Clara had spent years seeing people others overlooked. Villagers, children, servants, anyone who felt invisible. Somehow, despite being surrounded by thousands of people, she had often been the only one paying attention. Noah's fingers tightened slightly around her hand. Then something unexpected happened. His lips moved. The sound was barely audible. Clara leaned closer. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Noah whispered a single word. A name. Clara. And for the first time in 7 days, hope no longer felt impossible. The single word spoken by Noah spread through the infirmary faster than any announcement could have. By sunrise, every servant, healer, and advisor in the palace knew the young heir had finally spoken. Yet what unsettled them most was not that he had spoken. It was whose name he had chosen. Clara arrived early the next morning to find fresh flowers beside Noah's bed. She smiled softly. The flowers had not been there the night before. Neither had the stack of storybooks resting on a nearby table. Someone had brought them after hearing the news. Small signs of hope were beginning to appear throughout the palace. Noah looked tired when he opened his eyes, but the empty, distant look that had haunted him for days seemed weaker now. He noticed Clara immediately. A faint smile touched his face. "Good morning," she said gently. Noah nodded. The simple movement felt like a miracle. Ethan stood near the window watching the exchange. He had spent most of the night reviewing reports from the healers. None of them could explain what was happening. Noah's condition remained unusual. His strength had not fully returned. Yet several concerning symptoms had begun fading. The changes were small, but undeniable. More confusing still, the improvement seemed strongest whenever Clara was nearby. One healer finally approached her after breakfast. "Tell me honestly," he said. "What treatment are you using?" Clara glanced toward Noah before answering. "I am listening to him." The healer sighed in frustration. "That is not a treatment." "Maybe not," Clara replied. "But it is a start." Later that afternoon, Ethan found Clara sitting beside Noah while the boy slowly turned pages of one of the storybooks. The sight stopped him for a moment. Just yesterday, Noah had barely responded to anyone. Now he was reading. Slowly, certainly, but reading. Clara looked up when she noticed Ethan. "He likes stories about explorers," she said. Ethan blinked. "How do you know that?" Noah answered before she could. "Because she remembers." The room fell silent. Ethan stared at his son. Noah rarely spoke more than a few words, even when healthy. Hearing him answer so naturally felt almost unreal. Clara smiled and returned her attention to the book. Ethan remained standing there longer than necessary. An uncomfortable realization was growing inside him. Clara remembered everything. Favorite stories, village names, birthdays, small details about people most others forgot within minutes. He had always considered it kindness. Now he wondered if it was something deeper. As evening approached, Noah suddenly reached for Clara's hand again. The movement was stronger than before, almost instinctive. Clara gently placed her hand over his. The moment their fingers touched, Noah released a long breath and visibly relaxed. Several healers exchanged startled looks. One quietly stepped closer to observe. Ethan noticed it too. Something was happening. Not dramatic, not magical in any obvious way. Yet the room itself seemed calmer whenever Clara and Noah were together. The boy's breathing steadied. His expression softened. Even the fear surrounding him appeared to retreat. Then an elderly healer, one who had remained silent for days, slowly stood from his chair. His eyes widened as he studied Clara. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered words that made every person in the infirmary turn toward him. I have seen this before. The room became perfectly still. The old healer looked directly at Clara. The gift was never a myth after all. The words spoken by the elderly healer lingered in the infirmary long after the room fell silent. No one moved. No one even seemed willing to breathe too loudly. The old man slowly approached Noah's bedside, his eyes fixed on Clara with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. When I was a young apprentice, he said quietly, my mentor told stories about a forgotten bloodline, a family blessed with a rare gift. They could not cure every illness. They could not perform miracles, but they carried a unique ability to restore what fear and despair had weakened. Several healers exchanged uncertain looks. One shook his head. Those are legends. The old healer never looked away from Clara. That is what I believe too. Ethan's attention shifted toward Clara. She remained calm, but something in her expression had changed. Not surprise, more like resignation, as though she had always known this conversation would eventually happen. Noah continued holding her hand. Color had begun returning to his face. The difference was subtle, yet impossible to ignore. Is it true? Ethan asked softly. For a moment, Clara did not answer. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the floor. Finally, she looked toward Noah before speaking. My grandmother used to tell me stories. Her voice remained gentle. She said our family carried a gift that responded to emotional wounds as much as physical ones. The room remained completely silent. Clara continued. Most people think healing is only about the body. She believed loneliness, fear, grief, and hopelessness can hurt someone just as deeply. Ethan felt a chill run through him. He glanced toward Noah. During the past year, the boy had become quieter, more withdrawn. Ethan blamed himself for some of that. He had spent countless hours governing the kingdom. Meetings often replaced family dinners. Responsibilities frequently interrupted promises. He loved his son more than anything. Yet love and presence were not always the same thing. The realization struck painfully. Clara lowered her eyes. My grandmother also warned me never to speak openly about the gift. Why? Asked one healer. A faint smile touched her face, though sadness lingered behind it. Because people fear what they do not understand. Several council members suddenly looked uncomfortable. Ethan noticed immediately. The palace had been full of fear and suspicion when rumors spread about Clara. People questioned her intentions, questioned her influence, questioned her kindness. Looking back, it all seemed painfully familiar. Clara's popularity had frightened people who valued control more than compassion. The old healer nodded slowly. That explains many things. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? The villages she helped. The old man smiled softly. The children who seemed happier after speaking with her. The families who recovered hope after disasters. We assumed it was simply her personality. His gaze returned to Clara. Perhaps it was more than that. Clara immediately shook her head. No, the gift does not create kindness. It only works through it. Those words settled heavily over the room. For years, people had searched for extraordinary explanations while overlooking something much simpler. Clara cared. Deeply. Consistently. Without expecting anything in return. Noah suddenly squeezed her hand again. Stronger this time. Then he slowly pushed himself upright against the pillows. Gasps filled the room. Ethan took an involuntary step forward. Yesterday, such movement would have been impossible. Noah looked tired but alert. His eyes moved between Clara and his father. Then he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. I knew she would come. Ethan's throat tightened. Because in that moment he realized something heartbreaking. The one person his son trusted most was the very person the palace had pushed away. Noah's words echoed through Ethan's mind long after the infirmary became quiet again. I knew she would come. The certainty in his son's voice was impossible to forget. That evening, after the healers completed their examinations and Noah finally fell asleep, Ethan remained alone beside the window overlooking the palace gardens. Below him, lanterns glowed softly along winding stone paths. Everything looked peaceful, yet his thoughts refused to settle. For years he had believed leadership meant making difficult decisions for the greater good. He had accepted compromise as part of ruling a kingdom. But lately, those compromises felt less like wisdom and more like excuses. Clara sat quietly near Noah's bedside reading from one of the storybooks he loved. Her voice remained soft and steady. Every few pages, Noah smiled. Every so often, he asked a question. The improvement seemed almost unbelievable. Earlier that morning, he could barely sit upright. Now he was engaged, attentive, and present. Not fully recovered. Not yet. But undeniably returning to himself. Ethan watched them from across the room. The scene stirred another memory. Years ago, shortly after Clara arrived at the palace, she had organized a spring festival for orphan children living throughout the kingdom. Most officials considered it a minor event. Ethan almost skipped it entirely. At the last minute, he attended for a few minutes before another meeting. What he remembered now was not the festival itself. It was Clara. She knew every child's name, every favorite game, every dream they had shared with her. Somehow she made each child feel important. At the time, Ethan admired it. Then he moved on to more urgent matters. Looking back, he wondered how many important things he had overlooked because they did not appear urgent. The next morning, Noah requested breakfast for the first time in over a week. The servants nearly cried when they heard. News spread through the palace faster than any official announcement. Hope returned to halls that had felt heavy with fear only days earlier. Yet not everyone seemed pleased. During a council meeting that afternoon, Ethan noticed several advisors exchanging nervous glances whenever Clara's name surfaced. Their discomfort no longer escaped his attention. "Something troubles you," Ethan said suddenly. The room immediately fell silent. No one answered. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "A child is recovering after every expert failed to help him. Yet some of you appear concerned." An older council member cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, people are beginning to talk." "About what?" The man hesitated. "About Clara Whitmore." Ethan stared at him. "And why exactly is that a problem?" No one responded immediately. The silence itself felt revealing. For the first time, Ethan saw the situation clearly. It was never Clara's kindness that frightened certain people. It was influence, respect, trust, the things she earned naturally without titles or power. After the meeting ended, Ethan walked through the palace alone. He passed servants smiling for the first time in days. Guards discussing Noah's recovery with relief. Staff members quietly sharing stories about Clara helping them years earlier. Everywhere he turned, people remembered her. Not because she demanded attention, because she made them feel seen. As evening approached, Ethan returned to the infirmary. Noah was laughing softly at something Clara had said. The sound stopped him in the doorway. He had missed hearing that laugh. More than he realized. Clara looked up and noticed him. Their eyes met briefly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan experienced a realization more unsettling than any political crisis. The kingdom had nearly lost its future. And the person who saved it was the very person he had failed to protect when she needed him most. The realization followed Ethan everywhere during the next 2 days. It sat beside him during council meetings. It accompanied him through palace corridors. It lingered in every conversation about Noah's recovery. The more he observed, the more difficult it became to ignore. Clara had not changed. The truth was that he was finally seeing her clearly. Meanwhile, Noah continued improving. He walked short distances through the infirmary with assistance. He laughed more often. His appetite returned gradually. Every healer in the kingdom called the recovery remarkable. Yet another question had begun quietly spreading through the palace. If Clara's gift was real, why had so many people worked so hard to dismiss her? The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. On the third morning after Noah first spoke, Ethan requested access to archived council records from the previous year. He intended to review the complaints that had surrounded Clara before her departure. At first, the documents appeared ordinary. Reports, meeting notes, formal concerns submitted by advisors. But the deeper he looked, the stranger the pattern became. The same names appeared repeatedly. The same small group of influential nobles had submitted most of the accusations. More troubling, many complaints referenced events that never actually happened. Ethan frowned as he continued reading. The inconsistencies were obvious now. Why had he not noticed them before? Because he trusted the people presenting them. Because he was distracted. Because he assumed someone else had verified the facts. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. That afternoon, he summoned several council members for questioning. None appeared comfortable. One by one, their explanations weakened under scrutiny. Dates did not match. Witnesses contradicted previous statements. Details shifted each time new questions were asked. Finally, an elderly records keeper stepped forward with information no one expected. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. There was pressure. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Pressure from whom? The old man hesitated. Then he named Lord Victor Ashford, one of the kingdom's most influential nobles. Silence filled the chamber. Ethan knew the name well. Lord Ashford controlled several important trade networks. He possessed wealth, political influence, and countless connections throughout the kingdom. The man had also been among Clara's loudest critics. Suddenly, pieces began fitting together. Clara's charitable programs strengthened local communities. Stronger communities relied less on certain noble families for support. Her popularity gave ordinary people confidence. Confidence reduced dependence. Dependence had always benefited people like Ashford. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. This had never been about protecting the kingdom. It had been about protecting power. Hours later, Ethan walked alone through the palace gardens, struggling to process everything he had learned. Clara had endured months of rumors and suspicion, not because she had done anything wrong, because she threatened a system built upon influence and control. The injustice of it settled heavily upon him. Near sunset, he found Clara sitting beside a fountain while Noah fed pieces of bread to several ducks floating nearby. Their laughter drifted through the evening air. For a moment, Ethan simply watched. Neither noticed him immediately. The scene felt peaceful in a way the palace rarely did. Noah looked healthier every day. Clara looked genuinely happy for the first time since returning. Eventually, she noticed Ethan standing nearby. Their eyes met. There was no anger in hers. No resentment. Somehow that made everything worse. Because forgiveness was far more difficult to face than blame. Ethan slowly approached. Before he could speak, Noah grinned and pointed toward the fountain. Clara says every kingdom needs people who care more about helping than winning. Ethan glanced at Clara. She smiled softly. A simple statement, yet it revealed more wisdom than most council meetings. And for the first time, Ethan understood that the greatest threat to the kingdom had never been Clara's gift. It was the people who feared what her kindness revealed about their own choices. Within a week, Noah was walking through the palace gardens without assistance. The transformation felt so extraordinary that many people struggled to believe it had happened. Servants who had quietly feared the worst now smiled whenever they saw him. Healers who once exhausted every possible treatment admitted they could not fully explain his recovery. Yet Noah himself seemed unconcerned by the mystery. He was simply happy. Happy to run along the garden paths again. Happy to read stories. Happy to spend time with Clara. One bright morning, the palace hosted a small gathering to celebrate the heir's return to health. It was not an official royal ceremony. Ethan wanted something simple, something sincere. Nobles, advisors, healers, servants, and village representatives gathered in the central courtyard beneath banners that moved gently in the spring breeze. Noah stood beside his father wearing a dark blue jacket embroidered with the royal crest. His face carried a healthy glow that had been absent for far too long. Clara remained near the edge of the crowd, clearly uncomfortable with attention. She had never sought recognition. In truth, she would have preferred remaining unnoticed. Unfortunately for her, Noah had other plans. As Ethan finished thanking the healers and palace staff for their dedication, Noah suddenly stepped forward. The crowd quieted immediately. The young heir looked smaller than the adults surrounding him, yet there was remarkable confidence in his expression. Ethan glanced down curiously. Noah cleared his throat. There is someone missing from that list. A murmur spread through the gathering. Ethan already knew where this was going. Noah pointed directly toward Clara. Hundreds of eyes turned at once. Clara looked surprised, then embarrassed, then helplessly amused. Everyone kept trying to save me, Noah said. But Clara was the one who stayed. Silence settled across the courtyard. Noah continued before anyone could interrupt. When I was scared, she listened. When I felt alone, she stayed. When everyone else talked about what was wrong with me, she talked to me. Several people lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. Noah's voice remained steady. She never treated me like an heir. She treated me like Noah. Ethan felt his throat tighten, because those words revealed something important about leadership, something he wished he had understood sooner. Applause began slowly, then spread throughout the courtyard. Not forced, not ceremonial, genuine. Village representatives applauded first, then servants, then healers. Soon nearly everyone joined. Clara stood frozen as the sound echoed through the palace grounds. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. Years of suspicion, rumors, and dismissal could not disappear overnight. Yet standing there surrounded by people who finally saw her differently, something softened in her expression. Across the crowd, Ethan noticed several council members watching silently. Even they seemed unable to deny what everyone else had witnessed. Clara's value was no longer a matter of opinion. It was visible everywhere. In Noah's recovery, in the loyalty of ordinary people, in the countless lives she had quietly improved over the years. Noah suddenly crossed the courtyard and grabbed Clara's hand. The gesture was simple, childlike, completely sincere. "You should stand with us," he said. The entire gathering watched. Clara looked toward Ethan. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan stepped forward and offered a small nod. Not as a king issuing an order. As a man acknowledging a truth he should have recognized long ago. Slowly, Clara joined them at the center of the courtyard. And as applause continued beneath the bright spring sky, the kingdom witnessed something it would remember for years. The woman they once pushed aside had become the reason their future still stood before them. The celebration ended, but its impact remained long after the courtyard emptied. For the first time in many years, the palace felt different. Lighter, warmer, as though a window had finally been opened after being closed for too long. In the weeks that followed, Noah's recovery continued steadily. Soon he was attending lessons again, exploring the gardens, and filling the palace halls with the energy only a healthy child could bring. Every morning seemed brighter than the one before. Yet the greatest changes were not happening to Noah. They were happening to the people around him. Clara no longer entered rooms as an outsider. Servants greeted her with smiles. Healers sought her advice. Village leaders regularly visited the palace to thank her for projects she had started years earlier. Even some nobles who once ignored her now treated her with genuine respect. Trust, once broken, could not be rebuilt instantly. But truth had a way of revealing itself over time. One quiet evening near the end of spring, Ethan found Clara standing alone on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sky glowed with shades of gold and blue as the sun disappeared beyond distant mountains. Below them, lanterns slowly flickered to life throughout the capital. For a moment, neither spoke. The peaceful silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Ethan stepped beside her. "The kingdom is changing," he said. Clara smiled softly. The kingdom was always capable of changing. Ethan looked toward the horizon. "I should have seen the truth sooner." Clara remained quiet. He continued before losing the courage to say what needed saying. "When people questioned you, I told myself staying neutral was the responsible choice." His voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Now I understand that neutrality helped the wrong people." Clara studied the lights below. "You had a kingdom to protect." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That was the excuse I used." The honesty surprised even him. "The truth is that protecting a kingdom means protecting the people who make it better." Clara looked at him then. For the first time, there was no distance in her gaze. No wall built from old disappointments. Just understanding. Ethan exhaled quietly. "I cannot change what happened." "No," Clara agreed gently. "You cannot." The answer was simple. Not cruel. Not comforting. Simply true. Then she smiled. "But people are not defined only by their mistakes. They are defined by what they choose after them." Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest. Months ago, he might have searched for forgiveness. Tonight, he realized something more important. Growth mattered more than absolution. Beside them, a familiar voice interrupted the moment. "I knew I would find you here." Noah stepped onto the balcony carrying a book beneath one arm. He grinned when he saw them together. Without hesitation, he moved between them and grabbed both their hands. Clara laughed softly. Ethan could not help smiling. Noah looked out across the kingdom and sighed dramatically. "Good. Everything feels normal again." The three of them stood together as twilight settled across the land. Below them, thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. Villages Clara had helped. Families she had supported. Communities she had strengthened. A future she had quietly protected long before anyone realized it. Ethan looked at Noah, then at Clara. The kingdom's future stood beside him, healthier than ever. And the woman they once rejected had become one of the reasons that future still existed. Sometimes destiny did not arrive through power, titles, or grand displays. Sometimes it arrived through kindness, through listening, through a single hand reaching out when everyone else had given up. And sometimes, that one touch changed everything.